opinion, I don't think we can intelligently locate any of the buildings in the Parliamentary Triangle without knowing precisely where Parliament House is going to go. We'll be going to be forced into assumptions.
Not only buildings, but roadways. The whole of the road system and the provision for traffic must depend on the location of this building.
There's an aesthetic point, too. I don't see how you can possibly balance the whole triangle up unless you've got the focal point.
Well, from the point of view
also set up under the Commission statute was the most important external advisory group that we have, the National Capital Planning Committee. And this planning committee consists of 9 eminent professionals, architects, engineers, planners, people with cultural background, drawn not from Canberra, but drawn from all over Australia. And this, of course, provides insurance that we don't take a purely parochial point of view. The interesting parallel between the composition of the planning committee and the Commission is that we tend both to be interdisciplinary. We consist of the professions, the architects, planners, engineers, economists, managers, programmers, and so on.
But I think in a way it does.
Stop.
Yeah, I think in a way it does. That the design composition is completed at the Parliament House. If you're in the triangle, the building that you see at the end of the view and the vision is really the house.
All right, now, that's surely what we want to cancel out.
We are gathered here this morning to open the first meeting of the Parliament of the Commonwealth of Australia in a new capital city. Today marks the end of an epoch and the beginning of another.
The Honourable Speaker and members of the House of Representatives in Parliament.
Let me compliment the new Treasurer on his first presentation.
Prime Minister, if he would incorporate in his
Members of the Senate, please be seated. Mr. Clerk of the Senate, please command the usher of the black rod to let members of the House of Representatives know that I desire their attendance in the Senate chamber forthwith.
both publicly and politically. And we must keep in mind that the parliamentarian has every right to comment about the siting issues concerned with his own home. We must take these into account.
We also have to distribute traffic from this area into the offices in the Parliamentary Triangle itself. This is an added problem which has been simply solved by the introduction of this ring, which is so placed in the landscape that there are opportunities for underpasses both here and here. There is a simple flow of through traffic on the inner ring.
We shall fight in the fields and in the streets. We shall fight in the hills. We shall never surrender. And if this island, or a large part of it, were subjugated and starving, then our empire beyond the seas, armed and guarded by the British fleet, carry on the struggle.
Personally, I think we should concentrate on social and peacetime activities.
Well, that's maybe about war memorials, but I certainly agree that we should be trying to create memorials that are going to make some dynamic contribution to the life and the reputation, indeed, of Australia in the future. What about an institution as a memorial devoted to Aboriginal culture?
Why memorials? Why memorials and statutory museums?
The Commission would agree that we have not yet stated publicly, forcefully, the concept for the development of the land axis running from Capitol Hill, from Parliament House to the War Memorial, and associating the concept of the memorial at one end of the axis with physical development of national stature and national quality, with the quality development at a similar level on the southern side of the lake.
The flanking planting will also serve to screen the small-scale development on either side. In addition, we've decided to recommend the introduction of raised planting boxes into the paved median in this section of the road in order to reduce its apparent length.
Director of Landscape, would you comment on the planting material proposed?
As it is Anzac Parade, and because the flanking trees are Australian in character, I think that the central planting should be New Zealand in origin.
My husband and I are deeply touched by the warmth and kindness
and the kind of a neighbor that America always wants to have.
Expressing the gratitude of the government and the entire people of India.
have these major occasions, ceremonial, 2 or 3 times a year now. But when it's built up with museums and institutions on each side, it will obviously attract more people.
Land rights now! Smash the draft! I'll chauvinist pig!
Right, well, obviously the area that the demonstrations really take place is directly in front of Parliament House.
Well, this is so, and in terms of landscape, we have taken that into account. There will be demonstrations.
I think it's terribly important to have very large spaces and spaces
But what do you put on the ground surface?
And lots of trees.
Mr. Chairman, this morning I'd like the Planning Committee to consider the 3 alternative sites for the High Court in the Triangle.
All right, well, look, there's a general line you get in the zone of the triangle in front of the Parliament that you can call a view from the Parliament that's held by the Parliament. And the question is whether the High Court intrudes into that zone or not.
And this is what the Chief Justice in his letter was concerned about. It's a matter of constitutional position.
But he was sort of emphasising the separation on plan. With that site on the edge of the place, it's the elevation, the height of the building itself that allows.
Do you mean
separation.
it's different on the ground?
Certainly, he must be taken out to the site.
Yet law-abiding scholars write, law is neither wrong or right. Law is only crimes punished by places and by times. Law is the clothes men wear any time, anywhere. Law is good morning and good night.
Well, I'd invite your comment in relation to the sideboard at the end of that extension ladder.
Looking at that, I feel that we are on the right lines, that we want low-lying buildings which don't penetrate the skyline of the hills and which leave the scene of the Parliament building itself dominant and able to become the central focal thing.
Surely it emphasises the need for some colour contrast in these buildings, because from here, certainly, it's self-evident that Parliament House must be a very dominating building.
Our building, our National Art Gallery, must have a character and a symbolism of its own.
To get into the gallery,
when the gallery
and use these
opens,
entrances.
and the question is, how do you link up to existing road conditions?
Well, the initial access could be constructed in a loop system which comes from the existing road in that fashion there.
We've reached a stage now, I feel, in the job where we must build a full-scale prototype to test the internal environment of a gallery where the tri-grid ceiling is used. And
you're going to add all the mechanical systems into the tri-grid ceiling? Really operational systems?
Yes, we...
What is it you're worried about with the ceiling then, Jim? What are you looking for?
We want to make sure that the architecture is bland enough not to interfere with people's view of paintings and sculptures when we put them into this room.
The National Library undoubtedly is a great attraction to people who come to Canberra. There's been about 1.5 million people gone in the last 3.5
They
years.
get 2,000 a day, something like 7 or 8,000 on a peak day.
Into the library?
Into the library.
how do they fit in, Mr. Chairman, with our overall philosophy of having Australian artists and Australian works in the national capital and representative overseas people?
Well, beside these, we have the Pomodoro, the Barbara Hepworth, and the Henry Moore, so they do fit into our policy.
Is this sculpture the subject of a competition, the result of a competition?
Oh, yes, Paul.
Gentlemen, the next item on the agenda of the Planning Committee deals with the options available to the Commission in handling the area outside the national capital area. As you know, the structure of the national capital area has been fixed. The 3 points of the triangle define the triangle. The land axis is the axis about which the national capital symbolic buildings are located, culminating in Parliament House at this point. But now we should address our minds on what are the options available outside this triangle area. To keep man in scale with his environment, to not allow the machine to dominate, and to allow the natural environment to come through in the planning process. And of course the leasehold system of land tenure does permit this. For instance, in this inland city of Canberra, the waterways are vital and important. They are linked together to create lakes, to create a parkway system, and land protected on each side to provide an environment, a natural environment. Again, there are the hilltops. These are preserved against encroachment by residential development. The leasehold system is one which is peculiar to Canberra in Australia, but common in England. It's a form of title which covenants the form of development which can take place on that land. It's usually for a defined period of years. In fact, it is in Canberra, 25, 50, maximum of 99 years. Well, I agree with you. And the other thing is that the different thing in Tuggeranong is the Murrumbidgee River and its meandering path and the,
Well,
tree
that
line
help
following
you not
down.
to be too restrained by the axes. You don't want to be sort of caught and bound by rigid axes into a lack of freedom.
I think what Harry was trying to point out really was that the riverscape should be carried up from the gorge into the town centre.
What does that mean?
That the flow of landscape should come right up and be part of the town centre.
But you must be aware of the size of the Brindabellas relative to these three hills. They're much larger.
Well, what's the height of the Brindabellas back there? What are we talking about? 1,000 feet?
5 to 6,000 feet. Much larger, much more domineering.
Let's take this simplified line diagram where I understand they're using modern new processes like activated carbon and physiochemical means instead of the normal biological treatment.
Well, the Department of Works thinks this is a pretty neat solution to what was a hell of a problem.
Well, naturally enough, the operational cost is going to be higher than with our existing plants, but we believe that this is necessary in view of the pollution problem that will surround Canberra in due course.
Is there any inversion layer that's likely to affect the atmosphere?
You may recall a decade ago when wood fires were common, we had a very marked inversion problem late evening in winter. But with the coming of oil, well, that problem has almost disappeared.
Well, the basic approach is this, isn't it? That we make a proper survey of the ecology out of this. And we know they're going to be changed. As Keith said, there are going to be people. And it then comes down to determining what are the essential areas to preserve and the areas where you have to accept change.
Of all the committees that take an interest in Canberra, probably the most important would be the Parliamentary Joint Committee on the Australian Capital Territory. Now, we appear before this committee very often, and they take a close interest in our affairs.
Have any lessons been drawn from the Woden Valley experience that, to sort of bring about a situation that couldn't recur there?
Yes, most definitely. One of the things that has come out is that we must make ample provision for the 100-year flood. And
we had another Woden Valley flood only last week.
Well, why would you put them in the valleys? And Tuggeranong has major drainage problems.
We want to keep the higher ground for people's homes, keep them separate from those problems.
But another problem will be the timing of the town centre. It won't be developed in the early stages.
And so to have a transit system that will come much later.
Increased land values will certainly help to pay for the cost of the engineering works too, not only from these residential areas here overlooking the water, but also from the town centre itself, all the little cafes and restaurants around the foreshore and the lake.
The courtyards are involved in the identity of the building. From the parking area, for instance, you pick up a courtyard and the courtyard's character. The character changes courtyard to courtyard from a mountain stream up at this end down to a desert down at the other end.
Well, that was generated by the Commission's brief to us as the architects to grow the trees in this central slip that runs right through the project. And these areas that are shown just as planting areas will in fact carry up to 30-foot high trees by mounding flower beds up to 3-foot depth of soil.
Because that's the first thing that people are going to see when they come.
Well, impact's from impact, you know, it's sort of, they're all different. You can't have the same impact. You don't necessarily have to have a tall building and say, I'm a city, you know, and I get 10 miles away. But I think the situation here is we have no landscape, don't forget. We have a bare, bald hill with nothing on it, so we'll be planning the landscape as well as the building.
This shot shows the centred elevation against the background of the hills, and this is the government office building that your building will be balancing in the town square.
What direction is that one taken from?
That's taken from the east.
Am I really stuck with either of these designs here?
No, not really. What we've done is fix the building envelope, and we'd want you to react to that in terms of detailed architectural expression.
Well, the city is growing at 10% per year, and that means more workers in the city centre. Shouldn't we think of opening up the town centres as employment areas and avoid congestion? What does the Department of Interior think about this?
People jostling together interact with each other and create a viable city centre. They give the city character. They give it strength, which it now lacks. It's sterile.
People need quietness and safety in their residential areas. They also need convenience and safety in working and in shopping places. If the linear pattern of the Y plan is pursued, it places traffic freeways on the perimeter of the city's development.
This is the Y plan with the new towns and the urban development shown in brown. Outside it, we have the areas for broad-acre institutions like golf courses, cemeteries, research institutions. They help to define the edges of the new towns and separate them, provide for the setting of the city in the years to come, and also act as a land bank for reserve.
In 1963, we published the Future Canberra, which covered the population growth for 250,000 people.
Yes.
Now, we must let the public know the options available, the opportunities, when we take the population to 500,000.
This is a plan of the total commercial core. You can see here the position.
Within the community at large, we have extensive contacts with community groups. Now, of these community groups, perhaps the most important is the Advisory Council.
But are we planning this on the basis that it'll be offered as other leases are being offered at the present time, or that the concept that's being advanced for a corporation owned by the people might develop it?
This
There's plenty of people who work themselves blind to make lots of money, and when they're rich, fine. They have to work harder than ever before. Life was much easier when they were poor. Wealth is a burden, they say, but money makes money, and they are rich and riches showed. While wealth is a burden, it's hardly a load, and it sure is a funny old life.
So what we need from you, Arnis, is the town planning input into
Oh,
this.
we can give you that. We can tell you how many homes are going to be here, jobs here, or alternatively how many jobs distributed here and homes around the other periphery there.
Well, now, the travel time component will be the most important thing, so let's work on that first.
Well, we take into account the time between the two zones, so it's some function of the time that it takes to get from A to B.
I think just a point here, people's living habits are changing. There are more and more people now than 10 years ago who want to live in a town house rather than in an ordinary block. And it's with increasing leisure, people are saying, and more money, people are saying, well, we don't want to be tied to a suburban living. And so the suburb, in some ways, is, as we're getting more sophisticated, and the Australian, I think, people at large are, they're probably saying, well, let's change our living habits.
Presumably this type of development requires very little in the way of maintenance in terms of lawns, gardens, etc.
That's right. The scheme is designed to minimise the amount of work involved in establishing and maintaining a garden.
Mr. Shannon, with the high density in the Swinger Hill development, what steps have been taken to protect the individual's privacy?
This is done through the design, the establishment of dividing walls, and the disposition of the houses and the courtyards.
We're pleased to have your letter of 27 July, and we're interested in your comments about development.
If we had 2,000 respondents, and of those 1,000 said, we like Swinger Hill and we would live in Swinger Hill, the Commission would be justified in building at least 500 of those houses.
Swinger Hill type of housing, I think, will be particularly useful for transients. That is the...
But surely not only transients.
Not only
could be other
transients,
people
but
as well.
service personnel.
I wouldn't agree with
Teachers don't want to be making a garden and then be posted in 2 years' time.
So you have these streets here without too much frontage development on them, and then you have these residential areas separate from the traffic with cul-de-sacs leading back onto the high ground where people live.
And whereabouts how do we provide for pedestrians?
Well, each area includes a separate pedestrian route which is segregated from the main traffic routes by pedestrian underpasses. These underpasses lead the pedestrians from the main residential areas into the spine open space which runs the length of the Canberra development.
It's got to be clearly understood that there is a charge for parking, whether it's in structures or on the surface. And it's got to be more than just a nominal charge.
Yeah, but look, how do you fix the charge? What are you trying to do? Are you trying to balance the books? Are you trying to make a profit? Are you trying to provide a public service, or what? We're talking about $30 million here.
Well, what's teleportation?
Oh, it's like television, only instead of you seeing what happens at the other end, it comes right to you. You go in a little box, you dial your destination, and you're there. As long as you don't materialise on top of somebody else, it's great.
Tremendous.
That's what I call quality of life. You know, this is not only a matter of, let's say, art galleries or concert halls, but the places in which people shop, the education facilities.
That's very true. For instance, the fact that we take into account minimising the travel distances, the viability of the shopping centres.
And you're satisfied that you can integrate the two in an architectural sense?
Oh, quite sure, yes, yes.
Well, let's have a look at the other places then.
What we are concerned with is that these two clubs, one of which we've just looked at, do show a difference of character, architectural character.
We have no bananas. We have no bananas today. Before.
it's certainly a pretty inefficient use of their limited capital resources if they don't get together in some way.
But also it brings them together in some sort of social interaction.
Yes, but what about the sense of identity? You know, I think this is the sort of thing that we could easily lose, in that people have been used to identifying with their own church.
Well, that's one part of the story, but the real thing we need is the space in the schools where local community groups can get together in the early stages of their...
It's the arts and crafts centres could be used.
That's right.
Yes, or the arts and crafts centres, the assembly halls, multi-purpose areas, classrooms, these could all be used for community activities.
Surely it's timing that's important. After all, the community has to have a catalyst to get it going in the early stages of development, and the school is there, ready for the community to use.
Who can jump? Betty can jump. So Betty is the subject of the sentence, and the rest of the sentence is the predicate. Betty is the subject and can jump.
In that case, we'll have to have a primary school for 800 pupils. When will we need this school?
Well, you'll certainly need it not later than the beginning of 1975. There'll be over 600 enrolments at that time.
Yes, but the trouble with those 600, Gordon, is that they're going to be drawn from a fairly widely distributed area. The question is, therefore, then to you chaps, the education and science, so we're going to need 2 schools.
With a view to getting occupation at a fairly early date, has presented us some problems in works. Petitions are now coming forward, and the new network allows for them to come forward on the due dates.
That's right, yes. We're utilising the educational spine concept here, grouping the schools together with the commercial community facilities, recreational facilities, right down the spine of the development.
What sort of distances will people have to walk to reach their essential?
My understanding is that we've already completed for the college a number of residential buildings along the boulevard, but there are further programmed. Is that correct?
That's correct. We have completed these 2 residential buildings here. We've started these 2 here. These will be completed early this year, and next year the college will be requiring 4 more.
But if you go up there at the moment, it looks like a paddock. But my problem is to see when we're ready to make a formal submission to the Commission on this boulevard.
Public servants go to sea.
Familiar in a new significant light, and then in a following emotional catharsis whereby self-transcending emotions rise, expand, and finally ebb away.
Holding still. That's right. Smile.
Yes, in 1969 we had about 1 million visitors coming through Canberra, and about 14,500 of them came for conferences and conventions. In 2000 we'll have about 3 million visitors coming through the city.
Well, we covered up to 1982. But beyond that, we've allowed for further expansion up north. There are 44 diplomatic missions established in Canberra today. Another 11 countries have taken up sites but haven't built yet. And requests are coming in at the rate of 2 to 3 per annum. What the Commission is seeking from this planning committee is support for the reservation of further areas for diplomatic missions.
My friend was loved and honored from the Andes to Estonia. He soon achieved a pact between Peru and Patagonia. He never vexed the Russians nor offended the Romanians. He pacified the Letts and yet appeased the Lithuanians.
Ministerial colleagues, Mr. Peed and Mrs. Peed, ladies and gentlemen.
When it comes to the art of the explorer or the early settler, we can make comparisons with the opening up.
This, the 7th conference in Canberra.
You have seen representatives of the various departments at Canberra.
But anyhow, have fun. You couldn't have come to Canberra on a nicer day. There's a full moon shining tonight. Make the most of it.
Let's lift our sights. We're not looking for lighting just on buildings. We want the lighting to demonstrate the big scale plan of the city and the
Well, that's
pattern.
the thing. We use the lights right across the whole landscape. I really think it could work.
And the landscape is quite unique in its opportunities for this.
Yes, but this is a static thing, you know. I don't see
Well,
it would
why
make
not
that
enliven
move.
it? Why not?
We
know that the National Works component of our total program is about 3 or 4%.
The other important thing, though, is that although we spend a lot of money, the actual unit costs for water, sewerage, roads, drainage, houses, all the things we do and build are quite comparable.
Yes, these costs per head of population increase are definitely lower in Canberra than they are in New South Wales and Victoria.
The Department of the Interior's revenues from land sales do exceed your expenditure.
Well, this would be as in other major commercial estates in Australia, in Sydney and Melbourne?
Yes, remembering that we're excluding sewage and headwork.
There is a bonus, and that is we can create an environment in balance.
And the total development operation is very profitable.
The buildings will come and go, with the exception of a few only, Parliament House and others. It's the landscape, it's the relationship between the buildings, the spaces that count. If you look back in other capitals, if you look at Washington, if you look at London, the things that are important are the spaces, and the buildings are almost surrounding and provide an edge to the space. Well, we have the spaces. We've got the water access, we've got the land access with Anzac Parade, we've got the space we intend for a national place, but the culminating thing, the set piece, the major piece, is the new and permanent Parliament House. And everything must be subordinate to that. A national capital is only built once in a nation's history.